Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 76, Wibbly Wobbly. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in Doctor Who, Series 14, which aired in 2024. How are you doing today, Mike?
Hi, I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Great, thank you. Glad to hear that you're doing so well. And what's new in your writing world?
New in my writing world. I mean, I'm still editing.
The marathon continues.
Yeah, I'm about, probably 70% of the way through now. So,
Great.
Yeah, making progress is just a slow process. Yeah, I hope by the next podcast I'll be done, or at least mostly done. That's my plan.
Okay, fingers crossed.
Yeah. So what's going on with your writing?
I am 16% of the way into Meridian. It's still a big mess. I have a series of scenes. I don't want to give away too much because I want people to be excited when they read the story. But there is something very exciting happening on the space station, the main space station involved here. It's called Alasia. It's in orbit of Mars. And I am presenting what's occurring from the different perspectives of the characters, because they're all doing different things when this exciting thing happens. So I have to make sure that there's good continuity between those scenes, because I'm jumping between views, and I need to make sure that it all makes sense and that it makes sense on paper, because we've talked about this before when we're talking about stories that we look at. It's very easy to get stuck in the forest for the trees, and you know what's going on in the scene, and I know what's going on in the scene, so I'm writing this, but I have to take a step back and look at it from somebody who doesn't know, for the perspective of somebody who doesn't know what's going on, so I don't miss anything, or make any assumptions, or not answer obvious questions that somebody who's not familiar with where the story is going might ask. So that's where I am with that. Lots and lots of layers going on. And so it's still a mess because I haven't taken that step back and looked at it.
Yeah. That's fine.
It
takes some time.
Yeah, it does. It really does take some time. But so right now I just finished a scene where, I'm not going to explain how, but I have two characters at risk of drowning on a space station.
Interesting.
And it was so hard to write because it was freaking me out. Definitely feeling anxiety about where I had put my people.
Yeah, that's good.
And what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, or television?
Let's see, I've mostly been editing, so I haven't been doing too much else. I've just been watching this show called Leverage. Have you ever seen that?
No, what's it about?
It's a show where a group of former criminals use their skill sets to help people. So it's kind of like an A-Team or Equalizer kind of thing.
All right. This is different than the show. This is different than the show you were watching, where a bunch of criminals were like doing community service together and getting into trouble.
Yeah. Very different. Very different. This is more lighthearted. It's a heist type show. Like, some of the former people were thieves. There's like a hacker guy. There's a muscle guy, and their thing is always, let's go steal something. Like, let's go steal a concert or something like that. It's a fun show. It's not super deep or anything, but it's entertaining. So I've been watching that. Yeah, that's about it for this week. What have you been reading or watching?
Well, I'm reading the book that we're going to be talking about next week, so we'll identify that at the end of the podcast. And I also, at the request of my offspring, rewatched Predator, because of course I've seen that multiple times. And, you and I were talking about before we started recording about how Predator is actually a horror film. And because of the conversations that you and I have been having on this podcast, I was able to actually recognize that rather than just sinking into the action adventure science fiction stuff. I recognized it as a horror film primarily, which I wanted to thank you for that because it gave me a new perspective and appreciation for it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I like the one thing they do in Predator very well from a horror perspective is the slow reveal of the monster. Right?
Yeah.
That's a very typical thing in a horror story, and they just do it phenomenally in that movie.
Yeah, I really appreciated and watched it with a different lens this time and enjoyed that. Thank you.
Yeah, very cool. That's good.
The other thing I watched is I somehow missed Star Trek Generations when I was doing my Star Trek movie watching after we watched Wrath of Khan for the podcast. And I actually realized I had headcanon for Generations. And that's the one where they lose Captain Kirk in the maiden voyage of the Enterprise B. And I have this headcanon of John Harriman. That's the captain of the Enterprise B, who's takes his ship out without it being fully ready to go. Everything's coming on Tuesday. And I have this headcanon in my mind that from that point on, he refuses to move forward with his ship unless it's completely finished. He's like, we're not doing that again. You want me to do a press junket for this ship? You make sure it's done. I'm not taking this ship out of space dock until it's done. And then from thereafter, it was called the Harriman Protocol, that no ship would depart space dock unless it was finished.
That's great.
That's just the headcanon I've always had. That guy, this is how this guy would be changed by this
he's
terrible
so traumatized.
experience. Exactly. And he would be grim and forceful and no way. If it's not done, I'm not taking it out, period. And you don't like that, you get a different captain.
Yeah.
And then I always kind of visualize Demora, Sulu, the helmsman, who was on that, going back to her dad and her dad comforting her because of this terrible thing that happened.
Interesting.
And I think what that means is that maybe they could have spent a little time, or maybe not, I don't know. So are you ready to talk about Doctor Who?
Yeah, let's go.
Today we're talking about the story told in Doctor Who Series 14, which is the series that aired in 2024. And I'm going to read the short synopsis from IMDb. The Time Lord, known as the Doctor, travels through space and time with his companions, having incredible adventures and facing dangerous enemies. So did you like this series?
That's a very vague description that they have there.
Isn't it? Yeah, but you know what? If you think about it, because of so much of the history of Doctor Who,
right.
That's all you can do.
Yeah, you really have to generalize it. That's funny. So I generally love Doctor Who. I've seen a lot of even the original episodes from the 60s, and I loved the reboot that they did leading into this. I thought there's a lot of creative and clever elements throughout this season. I kind of enjoyed going through the episodes, I will say, but as I looked back on them afterwards, thinking about it in preparation for this podcast, I think maybe I wasn't super impressed with the season overall. I have a lot of thoughts. I'll try to keep it relatively short, but I'll go through sort of each episode and just give my thoughts on them. Maybe it won't be that short now that I'm looking at the list, but I'll go through and then feel free to hop in, or you can comment later, and then we'll talk about. I'll start off mostly with things that I liked and kind of my general impressions, and then we'll talk about what I didn't like after, kind of like we normally do. So, Space Babies is the first one. I'm gonna skip the Christmas one since I think we already talked about that.
Yeah.
Space Babies. I could have done without this episode. I thought it wasn't the best. I did like the idea of this, sort of the background world building story idea that the boogeyman was made by the system because of the children's stories. It was trying to sort of act as a sort of mother nanny figure itself, creating what it had seen before and what it knew of raising children. So I thought that was a cool idea. And I think it was kind of fun where they went with it. The Devil's Chord episode, I thought it was funny how they're all making really lame music to start it, because music had kind of been pulled out of the world. That was funny. And I liked how the maestro was related to the toy maker. I suspect that's going to be something that pops up again in future seasons with other children or relatives or other things related to the toy maker. That seemed like such a big thing they set up. So I'm glad that they're continuing with that. And I love that it introduces this concept of the one who waits. It's like an interesting setup. Ooh, that sounds cool. Where's that going to go? So I like that. And then Boom, the next episode, where I think that was the one where he steps in the landmine, right? Yeah. Yes. Again, I liked some of the world building in this episode, that they had this war that was solely for profit, and it ended up that they're fighting and they're dying, but there was no real enemy. I thought that was a great idea. I liked the idea that there was an AI version of the soldiers that was stored for the next of kin. I thought that was very interesting and something that's kind of we can kind of see in today's world how we might go to something like that. And I think this episode had glimmers of some of the earlier seasons of Doctor Who with that kind of world building and the tension that they build throughout the episode. I think there was some good setup here. And I do like that the AI ended up overpowering the system at the end. I thought that was a good payoff for that character. 73 Yards. That was the Fairy Circle / Mad Jack episode. I thought that was very creepy. It was a good, like, creepy feel for a Doctor Who episode. Every once in a while they get those where it just kind of throws you off balance. I don't think we've had that in this season up till this one. So I think this one introduced that and did it pretty well. I loved at the end how she uses the old woman being 73 yards away and freaking people out to eventually get the Prime Minister to resign. She gets him right positioned perfectly. I thought that was very clever. I appreciated that. And then Dot and Bubble. That was the one where it's this world where people are sort of locked into their virtual realities.
Yes.
Communicating with each other online visually. Obviously, that's, again, good world building. It's obviously making fun of our obsession with cell phones and being online. This episode felt almost like an episode of Black Mirror, if you've ever watched that show. This sort of dark dystopian future possibilities. It felt like it could have been one of those episodes for sure. And there's an interesting thing in this episode. They did a great job of making us care about, I think her name was Lindy, like the main woman that we're following.
Yeah.
And the other people in the world, just enough until we don't care about them. So we empathize with the Doctor that he can't save them, but at the same time, we also don't care so much that when we realize that they're going to die, it's like, okay, they kind of brought it on themselves. So I think they set up those characters and then turned them just enough to where you can follow along and then not be so horrified when you realize what's going to happen. I thought that was really clever. And there's some interesting themes in this episode about selfishness and superficiality and bigotry. So they mixed a few different things together. I thought this was a fun, lighter episode after Boom and 73 Yards, which were a little more serious and dark. It wasn't the most exciting episode, but this felt like a middle episode from, previous seasons.
Yeah. And
then we had Rogue, which I loved the idea of shape-shifting aliens doing cosplay within the human society. I thought that was really funny. Again, interesting world building with that, and it felt like a very Doctor Who-y type setup. And it felt like Rogue sort of felt like the crew was finally getting into a groove with the storytelling and the characters. Everything started to feel like it was coming together in this episode for me. Yeah, I have specific thoughts that we can talk about in what could be improved or maybe what we didn't like as much. And then The Legend of Ruby Sunday. That was the penultimate episode, I believe. Yeah. This one felt to me like a good Doctor Who episode from the past, where different threads start coming together, right? We get to see some characters from previous episodes and previous seasons. We see that an alien entity has been attached to the TARDIS for quite some time and has been setting up little bits of havoc that would come back later. That reminds me of a lot of like the good episodes from past seasons. And I will say I don't have memory of Sutek from back in the day. I suspect that's probably like from the 60s era. And I don't know if I saw that episode. If I did, I forgot about Sutek. But it's always fun when they bring back old enemies of the Doctor, so I thought that was nice. And I thought this episode was a very good build-up to the season finale. And then in the season finale, which is Empire of Death, I think, I like how the Doctor's often upset when he is forced to kill something, a monster, a bad guy, whatever, even something horrible like this, as this manifestation of death. He still feels like, oh, why do I have to do this, right? It seems like he's forced to do it, but isn't happy with it. And I really like that. I like that about his character. And I think they did that in this episode fairly well. So often movies and television shows glorify killing. So it's nice to see a powerful being like the Doctor being sorrowful for his actions. So I like that a lot. And I also like the idea of things being significant because we make them that way, which was a theme of this episode. So those are the aspects of that I liked. Overall, I think this is an interesting, first season for the run of this Doctor. I felt like it got mostly better toward the end. It felt like they started to groove. I have a number of thoughts on things that I think didn't quite work so well, but I'll save that for the next section. So, how did you like this season overall? What did you like about the episodes?
I thought the season was a mixed bag, which is essentially what you were just saying as well. I thought there were some really good episodes and then some okay episodes and then episodes that I really wanted to turn off. So I organized it by what I thought was good, what I thought was okay, and what I would never watch again. And
cool, good. I'm glad. I suspect we'll have different likes and dislikes, so I'm very curious to see where this goes.
So my favorite episode of the season was Boom, which is the one where he stands on a landmine. I love the immediacy of the danger, and there's a ticking clock, and there's an uncertain solution, and then there's really great twists when his companion, Ruby, is injured, and other people show up and are connected to the process of saving the Doctor. I thought it was just a great episode. I think it was the best episode of the season, in my opinion. I also really enjoyed The Legend of Ruby Sunday for the same reasons that you articulated. It's bringing together all these threads, and we get to see new people, the old favorites coming in, as well as new people. And it was, as we've talked about before, a collaborative group trying to collaboratively solve a problem, which I always enjoy. So I thought that was really well done. And I actually liked the season finale, Empire of Death. The Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death together, I thought were really well done stories, essentially two-part story. So I thought that was really well done. The ones that I thought were okay were Space Babies. I thought it was fine. It was cute. It was very typical Doctor Who, taking something kind of silly and running and making it serious and running with it. And I thought, okay, it worked. It was very typical Doctor Who. Dot and Bubble was the same kind of thing to me. Very typical. Though I thought that the twist at the end of this young lady who's learning all these new things, right? She's gotten so much new information about her reality, about what's going on, and then turns around and ignores it all at the end. I thought that was an amazing twist. She learned nothing. And I thought, wow, that was... I can't think of another episode that was quite like that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's kind of dark. That is a very Black Mirror type thing.
Yeah, it was very dark.
Sort of this dystopia, and then you have some hope, and it's like, well, have they really learned anything from this?
Yeah.
No.
I'm trying to think. I do feel like there are episodes in maybe the David Tennant era that were like this, but I can't remember any specifics where he walks away because somebody refuses to learn.
Yeah, I want to feel like there's at least a few episodes in the past. I mean, there's been so many.
I also actually put 73 yards into this. 73 yards, except for one really important issue, would have been my favorite episode. I thought it was brilliant up until the end. And then I was disappointed, but we can talk about that later. And then I thought Rogue was good. I thought Rogue would also have been one of my favorite episodes, except for a couple of things that we can talk about later. And then I will never, ever watch Devil's Court again. It was too over the top. And maybe it was the placing of it. You know, I think it was right after Space Babies, which was silly. And the Devil's Court was silly. And I think maybe if they had placed the Devil's Court after something serious like Boom or like 73 Yards, it would have hit a little differently. But as it was, right after Space Babies, I was sort of like, this is just too much ridiculousness. And I didn't enjoy it. So what I also enjoyed...
I don't
what I also really enjoyed was also the references to this One Who Waits, because that's setting up for like the bigger, badder villain, which is cool. And the mystery of who is Mrs. Flood. So she's this lady who, she came in to help the great-grandma, Cherry, when the mom had to leave.
Yeah.
And she seemed to have some knowledge of him. She said, "Oh, you clever boy," which was always Clara's phrase, right? That was her phraseology for the doctor. And then she's at the very end saying, Ruby's happy, but the doctor is going to have a very bad time, or he's going to have terror or something. So she has some knowledge. Who is she? Is she the one who waits? Anyway, I like that. I like that infusion of that mystery right at the end. I thought that was a lot of fun and very doctor, and so gave me something to look forward to. So if you had to change anything in this series, what might you have changed as a writer?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that didn't land for me. All right, again, I'll start by going through the episodes. Space Babies, like you said, it was fine, I guess, as an opener. It was kind of silly to me. It didn't do much for me. It was like it was okay. You know, it was a lighter, sort of easy into the series episode, so that's fine. Like you, the Devil's Cord just didn't work for me. I thought also it was over top. This episode was not my jam. I think for me, making it a little more serious maybe would have worked better. It was just kind of all over the place. I don't know. It didn't grab me. So yeah, maybe I would make that one more serious. Boom. Yeah, Boom, like I said, I think this was where it was starting to come into its own. The one thing about Boom, I felt it was very, because of the setup, it was very stationary. So it felt that way. It's like, okay, we're just kind of locked here in this one place. But that's, that was a setup for the story. So that wasn't too bad. But the thing that I felt like they missed out on was the emotionality between the daughter and her father who had died. Like they were like, oh shoot, we can't let her know what happened. But then she finds out what happened. She had like no real visceral reaction to it. I don't know if that was just the actor or the direction or the writing, but I wanted to see more horror and more sadness, more something. That felt kind of flat to me, and I think that could have elevated this episode a little bit more.
I agree.
73 yards. Okay, all right. I feel the same with you. I was into it. I was like, oh, this is cool. This felt very creepy, Doctor Who. Let's see where this goes. And then I don't understand the ending. So maybe we can talk about this and you can explain it to me. So here's what I didn't get. So she lived a whole life just to be able to distract her younger self so the Doctor wouldn't step in the fairy circle. But then doesn't that mean she also wouldn't stop the awful Prime Minister in the future that's to come? Which seemed like it was the whole point of it. So they undid the point of it. I didn't get that. I also don't understand like what the older version is saying to people that freaks them out so much. Like, what could someone say that makes you just like run away in terror from somebody? That didn't really make any sense to me, and they didn't explain it. Why was she attached at 73 yards? That wasn't explained. So it was a cool episode, but I just felt like wanting at the end of it. So before I move on, can you explain that stuff to me? Because I have the
exact same questions. It felt sloppy. It felt, because this was intense and brilliant setup that then was just let fall apart.
Yeah, Yeah, it was left hanging, and it was left hanging, and not in a way that's like, oh, this is going to be explained in the future. It was like, okay, this is done, we'll move it on.
Now. Ruby has finished
But
her time as a companion. So we're never going to get the answers to these questions unless she comes back. There needed to be something said to these people by that old woman that drove away her mother, who put a restraining order on her because of this. What is it? You can't just throw that out and then not explain it.
Yes.
Yeah, it was enough to make Unit, thank you. That makes Unit disappear after all the things that they have seen and done.
Exactly.
And so the fact that it isn't communicated to us means that they didn't know. The writers didn't know. And I think that's a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, or maybe it was cut from the episode because it was too long and they didn't realize how important it was. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
But it seemed like something that was borderline magic, right? It wasn't just words. Right. It was something, there was some kind of supernatural impulse.
Yes.
That's the only thing that made sense.
And it would have made sense
the way that everyone ran away.
If Ruby had stepped into the fairy circle too. Then they could have had some kind of explanation dealing with the fairy circle.
Right. And also, where did the doctor go?
And where did the doctor go?
At the beginning. He just vanished and it was never explained.
On vacation.
Like, what happened? So that episode was very cool until it very much wasn't for me. Okay, so Dot and Bubble, like I said, I like the world building there. There's some interesting themes. I didn't think it wasn't the most exciting. It felt sort of like a middle episode, but I don't have too much bad to say about it. I think it was fine for what it was. Not sure what I would improve there. I think, it worked for what it was setting out to do. Like you said, it was one of those episodes where it kind of ends on a sour note because, the people that they're trying to save don't learn and end up dooming themselves. So I don't have much on that one. Rogue, the shape-shifting aliens. One of the things I didn't get, so at the end, right, when Ruby was stuck in this circular trap that was going to transport them somewhere, it's like, oh no, she can't get out. And then Rogue just knocked her out of it. Like, it seemed like they broke the logic of their own rule there. Like, oh, so she could just step out essentially, or jump, or someone could just pull her out. But it didn't seem like it was set up that way. It was like, oh, you're trapped. That's it. You're done. You can't get out of this.
And why
so
couldn't he,
I didn't like.
Why couldn't
I didn't
he
like
throw
that.
himself at her and roll them both out?
Exactly. Throw her a rope and pull her out. Like, he's the doctor. He's got to have something. So that bothered me. It felt like kind of a cheap out at the end of the episode. Otherwise, I thought it was fine. It didn't really blow me away. The Legend of Ruby Sunday. Like I said, I have mostly good things to say about that one. I think that was a really good setup. But then Empire of Death, I was very disappointed in. I liked sort of the tone of it, but and how the ideas of something being significant because we make it so. I liked that. But none of that explains why a death god couldn't see Ruby's mom in the past. It felt, again, like a cop-out to the mystery that had been built up. It's like, why can't he see her? There's no explanation. Just because. So I would have liked to have a better resolution to who Ruby's mother was. To me, this felt like The Last Jedi, where, if you saw that Star Wars movie, where the answer to the mysteries set up in The Force Awakens were basically nothing. There's no answer. The joke's on you for getting pulled along. It's like, don't build up a mystery and then have no satisfying answer for it. That's just super lame. And her name was because of the road? Like, didn't we already know that? That didn't add anything. Other than, the mother chose that. Why? Why would the mother point at the sign?
When there was nobody around.
Who was she pointing for? It made no sense. She could have just left a note with the name. It didn't make any sense. That was just, to me, that was silly. It felt, again, like they didn't have an answer for it. So they just said, we'll do this. I wanted something there. I think it felt like they just gave up. I would have made it something. Well, I'll come up with a suggestion in a minute after I bring up my other issue that I had. So at the end, they have this manifestation of death, right? and then they're dragging it through the timeline, and his statement is, bringing death to death brings life. What? Okay, but he was already on Earth, which was dead. Why didn't that bring everyone back to life? And why did that just magically undo everything and return it to normal? That didn't make any sense to me. I thought that was quite a lame solution, but it's also kind of very Doctor Who-y. I mean, they've done stuff like that in the past. It's just, you kind of have to roll with that a little bit. So I wasn't super unsatisfied with that part of it, but I would have at least made the solution have something to do with Ruby, like her mother was the goddess of life or time or something. And so Ruby was critical to this, and they needed her. And you could introduce a new character, another concept. Maybe that came about because of the toy maker. So not only bad things came into the universe because of the toy maker, but also good things like this goddess of life or whatever you wanted to do. It would have been better than what we got, I think, which was sort of a nonsensical Deus Ex Machina. So I was left unsatisfied with the finale. I didn't like it as much as you did, obviously. I think it had some cool stuff during the episode, but I felt all of the answers were weak. So that's how I kind of would have tweaked it. I know that's maybe a little bit more expected. Oh, Ruby is special. Her mother was special. But you set up a mystery for them, and then there's nothing special about them. That, to me, was just not satisfying. So anyway, enough. What do you think about my thoughts, and what would you improve?
No, I think your thoughts are fantastic. And your thoughts actually sort of coalesced something that I had scribbled a note about, but realized that now that note is actually sort of at the heart of the things that I was frustrated with. And one of them was what you just said about you set up somebody as special and then they're not special. And I had actually put a note in as I was watching this, no more impossible girl. One of the things that I absolutely loved when the Doctor Who reboot started was that Rose was ordinary. She was just a girl living in an apartment who, what was extraordinary about her was that she was just a really good person. She had compassion and understanding and courage, and that made her an amazing companion. And then we started to get these stories about the special person, you know, the chosen one kind of stories, which sort of culminated in the whole Clara impossible girl thing. And we were starting to see that here with Ruby, which was disappointing to me because I preferred the everyday ordinary kind of companion, which is where Ruby kind of started. You know, yeah, she had an unusual birth story, but that's not actually out of the ordinary. So I really wanted Ruby to be ordinary. And then all of a sudden her stories seemed to be going in the impossible girl route. And then, as you pointed out, the resolution was ordinary again. And that was frustrating because it seemed like there wasn't a real clear path as to how they wanted this character to go. But the other piece of it, my note for 73 Yard was finish the story. Because that's what happened. The story is unfinished. Yes. And I think that goes to a lot of what you were just pointing out. Empire of Death, the story is unfinished. And they threw in, like you said, the hand-wavy Deus Ex Machina stuff to finish the story rather than finishing the story itself. That's, I think, what these episodes that didn't really work for us, I think they were unfinished. And so that's kind of what in reaction.
There wasn't an explanation, right? When you set up a mystery and you don't explain it, that's very unsatisfying. Like in the TV show Lost, if you ever watched that, so many people were unsatisfied with the ending. Why? Because they set up like 50 mysteries that they never explained.
Yeah. A couple of the other things that I made note of was that I actually really liked Rogue, and the only reason that I put it in my okay list instead of my really good list was that it was not efficient in its use of time. It was inconsistent in its pacing. There was some really fast stuff, really good, interesting stuff, and then there were parts of it that seemed to drag. And I think it could have been tighter and better paced throughout and would have made a much more exciting episode that would have for me nudged it up my list a bit. And then
I like that analysis.
Yeah, and then Empire of Death, I think part of what may be a little bit of an albatross for the writers for these series is that the series finale has to be universe-ending stories, right? That the Doctor saves the universe. And I'm going to throw out the question, why? Does it really have to be universe-ending? I mean, yes, in the past it's been universe-ending, but I think it could be perfectly intense story if it's not universe ending, if it's just Earth ending, or even just London ending. You know, and I don't know, maybe they have to, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong and they have to have these incredibly huge consequences in their stories. But to me, the Empire of Death felt like it was pushing so hard to create universe ending story that it didn't always make sense. It didn't make sense to me that everywhere the Doctor went was going to be impacted by this creature. And why now? Again, it just felt like it was being pushed really hard. This has to be universe ending.
Yeah, and the other thing is, for me, I felt like with The Legend of Ruby Sunday, right, the penultimate episode, they were weaving together these threads. It was fun. For me, that was the best episode of the season. It felt like an old Doctor Who episode. But overall, it seemed like leading up to that and the Empire of Death, I would have liked to have seen some more episodes with some more threads thrown in, with some mystery built up. Because the mystery you got was basically like, oh, this lady shows up and, she's the face of the ambulance and she's over here and she's over here. And like that was pretty much it. And they kind of tried to tie it to Ruby, but then they didn't. It's like she just, her mother just happened to be there, and this thing just happened to not see her mother for some reason. Like, it just was unexplained even.
Yeah, the story's
so, yeah, I think if they had taken some more time, taken some more episodes, built it out a little bit more, I think they could have had a very satisfying ending. Yeah. For me, it wasn't satisfying, which is a shame, because I think they were going. But that said, I think it's a decent first season for a new Doctor.
Yeah.
I think it's better than Peter Capaldi's first season. I think that was just rather grim until toward the end of it.
I agree. Did you derive any themes from these episodes?
I mean, there's
as a whole.
Yeah, there's so many different things going on. If I look at the story as a whole, the season as a whole, I don't know. I don't know what the theme is. I mean, we see Ruby getting to meet her mom, which was cool by the end of the season, right? They're reunited. But it wasn't through anything other than a DNA database. Like, why didn't that already happen? If she really wanted to, that could have been done. It's not like
it was
a crazy thing nowadays.
In the church on Ruby Road, they did try to do a DNA hunt for her. Remember, that was at the very, very beginning. She was appearing on this show where she was trying to find her mom.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was just like the doctors enabled her to access a DNA database.
Right, but why? Why was his different? Yeah, so I don't really know what the theme of that is. Like, ordinarily you want to see like, okay, here's where the character goes, and then here's some change they go through, and here's their new life, and that kind of points you toward the theme. And what do they do in the climactic moment that shows you the thing that they learned? But in the climax, it had nothing to do with her.
Yeah,
she didn't do anything. It was just, the Doctor drags death around through time, and death defeats death, so life is returned. I don't get the theme of that, other than sort of general theme of perseverance, not giving up in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, in the face of an overwhelming enemy. I mean, that's a common theme in Doctor Who, I guess. Yeah. I do feel like the themes of Doctor Who are more interesting when it's like a character perspective outside of the main plot, right? Because the plots tend to be, fun or a little creepy or whatever. But when it's at its best when you care about the characters, and you're worried about them, you see them grow, you see them go through changes. I felt like theme-wise, this season was lacking, and I didn't really get a theme.
Yep.
So
the only thing.
Tell me why I'm wrong, and tell me what themes you got.
You're not wrong. The only thing I pulled from it was, which is a very common Doctor Who theme, is the power of friendship. That's something you see over and over again in Doctor Who, is this relationship between the Doctor and the companion is just the way the friendship helps save the day. The friendship, the loyalty is usually a huge component in however the story situation is resolved. So that was it.
Yeah, okay.
So what is your takeaway from Doctor Who season 14 as a writer?
Man, I mean, this goes back. The funny thing is, I had already written this up before you said what you said. So I think we're onto something here. My takeaway is create a satisfying ending where the characters use the knowledge and growth they've acquired over the course of the story to deal with the antagonist. Right? That's where I was missing the theme from the show. And the first part of that sentence is create a satisfying ending. So I think those two things work together, and I think a few of these episodes and the season overall, we didn't get that, at least for me. Focusing on a satisfying ending, I think, is my writing takeaway.
Yep, same for
What do you have?
I have the same thing. Finish the story.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in Doctor Who Series 14. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in the novel The Green and the Gray by Timothy Zahn. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk Doctor Who.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.